spring, there is heavy snow in winter, and in spring the snow melts and creates these beautiful blue lakes and rivers that were an important part of the life there. Temujin's mother, Olan, was kidnapped from her husband by Usiji, who was the leader of a very poor and insignificant tribe. Now, that sounds horrible, and it is. But in Mongolia, the typical way to get a wife or acquire a wife would be to go to a different tribe, and you would have to bring gifts, mainly horses, to basically purchase a wife. Okay? But if you're from a very poor tribe and couldn't afford the horses, you'd kidnap one. Okay? So this is what happens to Olan, and she's kidnapped. She is Useji's second wife, and he already had a son by the first wife. So as Useji's second son, Temujin was not treated well by his older half-brother. Will play into this story. Useji's tribe, as did most Mongols, lived in gurs, or dome tents. We think of them as a yurt. And they're made from a wooden frame that would be established, and then they put felt blankets over the wooden frame, and then hides, or basically leather over that to make them waterproof. The tribe lived a subsistence lifestyle. They were nomadic. Okay, they traveled all the time. That's an important thing about Mongolia. And they sustained this lifestyle by a combination of hunting, trading, scavenging, and raiding herdsmen. So herdsmen would be, always grazing either their horses or their sheep and their goats, and so these tribes would raid those herdsmen. The tribe itself was so poor they didn't have their own herd. So in the left-hand corner is a illustration of a Mongolian gur, and then in the lower right, of course, is a Mongolian gur. And a lot of Mongolians still live in these, and they still live a nomadic lifestyle. Of course, in Genghis Khan's time, you would not have the stovepipe coming up, because it was the center. They wouldn't have had that. But you can also see the grassy plains, vast plains, and the mountains, the snowy mountains in the distance. Olan and her family are abandoned. So Temujin's father didn't treat him well. But he trained them pretty well. He's going to have 4 sons. He is tough on them. He would make them, as little boys, do things, go, for instance, and jump into a winter stream and stay in the stream for a couple of hours. Almost to the point, exactly. Just the thought of it, especially today, right, Carl? But just to toughen them up and do all sorts of things. They're of course, wonderful equestrians, and they're hunters, and very tough. At one point, again, I mentioned they're nomadic. At one point, his father forgets him and leaves them as the family moves on, and they don't realize it for several weeks, or maybe they realize it, but they didn't come back to get him for several weeks. He's a little boy. When he's 9 years old, his father takes them to find a bride, okay, at age 9. So they went to another tribe, and again, they're very poor, so they didn't have the horses to buy the wife. So Temujin had to stay. He's left behind with the bride's tribe and work for them to basically earn his bride. Now, Useji, on the way home from leaving Temujin with his bride's tribe, is poisoned. He actually makes it back to his own tribe, but he dies. When Temujin hears of this, he rushes to his mother, and as I said, his father had died, to help his mother out. Now, after Useji's death, I hope I'm not making this too confusing. The father dies, Temujin's father dies because he's poisoned, okay? His second in command of this tribe looks at Temujin, Temujin and his brothers, and said, we don't need them, okay? This guy's now the Khan, the minor Khan of this poor tribe, and he said, I don't want competition. I don't want these boys growing up and saying, we're gonna take our father's place as the Khan of the tribe. Plus, this was a tribe that was very poor, and to feed another family, a woman and her, which now is 7 kids, okay, was very, very difficult. So what do? They abandon them. They take their horses, they take essentially everything they have, and they just leave them out in basically out in the plains, the high plains, to die. Okay? Yes?
You asked,
Pete.
you said you did ask questions. Who poisoned him?
It was the tribe, actually, that's a great question. It's Holen's tribe that he stole his wife from. He stole Holen from her home tribe. On his way back to his own tribe, he stops there to spend the night. A bad mistake. They recognize them and poison them. So anyway, so they're left without food, horses, or any means of survival. They're at the very, very bottom of steppe society at this point. As I said, he has 3 brothers, a sister, and 2 half-brothers. But they survive through sheer determination, and Holen was a wonderful, wonderful mother and a real strong woman. And she just forces them basically to survive. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Temujin has an older brother, half-brother, and they don't get along. Now, when the father dies, the half-brother becomes the head of the family as the oldest son. He also, in this tradition, Mongolian tradition, also had the right to marry the mother. It wasn't his mother, it was his stepmother. But this hadn't occurred yet because the boy was still fairly young. Well, Temujin and another brother of his find the older brother had captured some food and was eating it all himself, not sharing it with the family, which was they were all supposed to hunt and then bring the food back, and they'd all share it as a family. And they're furious, and he and his brother sneak up on the half-brother, and they each fire arrows into him and kill the half-brother. Holen's furious with this because this is the older brother who was supposed to help them survive. But he does, and so he becomes the head of the family. Now, all these hardships in his youth are going to teach him to take charge of his own destiny. He's going to be a guy that's not afraid to do what has to be done to survive, or There's also a caste system on the steppes, and he hates the caste system because he's the lowest rung of the caste system. Okay, he becomes the leader. In 1177, Temujin is captured and enslaved by Useji's former tribe, which had abandoned the family. So they hear that Temujin had killed his older brother, and that was actually taboo in the Mongolian society. So they come after him, capture him, and bring him back to their tribe and make him a slave. And he's being treated horribly. But he develops a couple of friends who help him to escape. And he actually uses he's smart. He gets away at night. He gets out of the gur at night where he's being held. And rather than stealing a horse and taking off across the open plains to try to make his escape, he knows he's going to be captured if he does that. He goes and hides in a frozen stream, sort of under the ice for 2 days. Okay? and then is able to sneak away and get back to his family. He was able to ally, so he develops this reputation. Yes.
Is the suffering of the raids and the thievery still going on today?
I don't think as much. I don't think, yeah. It's still very much a nomadic lifestyle. I don't really know about, I don't think so. I think it's more of a established society. That's a great question. He gets this reputation as this great young warrior, great young guy, he's an intelligent guy. He then is the head of this family with his mother. He takes the family to a stronger tribe and allies with the stronger tribe. Basically makes himself a vassal of this other tribe. And soon, because of his skills, he's able to move up kind of in the leadership, if you will, of this tribe. Now, at this time, the Mongol tribes were not united at all. They use marriages for temporary alliances, but they're always infighting amongst themselves, and again, raids and tribal warfare. Jan. Okay, he's married. So it's previously arranged. He goes back to the tribe where he'd been taken at age 9, right, to find a wife, and he had met a young girl there who they'd fallen in love, so he goes back to get her, and her name is Bort, and they marry, they create this alliance between the two tribes. Now she's going to be his only official wife, okay? He has what are called morganic wives, which would be sort of, a sub-wife or a junior wife. The difference is that only Bort's children would be in the line of succession when he passes away. And I looked it up just because I'm into genealogy. There are about 25 million people descended from Temujin. So, but he had a lot of sons who had a lot of sons too, so it just multiplied. So anyways, on their way home, what happens? She's kidnapped, okay, from him. His new bride, they're headed back to the tribe, and she's kidnapped and taken away. Now, after several months, he borrows some troops, and he goes after, recaptures Bort. Really, I guess a better way to say it would be reclaim Bort. He hadn't captured her, but reclaims her. But she gives birth to a son 9 months. 9 months from when she comes back to him. Okay? So the big question is, who's the father of the son? The son, whose name is Jokai. Who is Jokai's father? This is going to play into the history of the Mongols as we go along. That's why I'm mentioning it. Bort has 3 more sons, Chagatai, Ogadai, and Toluai. Okay? Plus some daughters and things. Now, Temujin had many other children, but they were barred from the line of succession, as I said, because they were from junior wives or from concubines. Okay, begins to unite the tribes. Temujin began his ascent to power by offering his tribe as an ally or vassal to a Khan by the name of Togrul, and he's a Khan of a larger tribe, a more powerful tribe. Togrul had provided, as I had said, warriors to help reclaim Bort from her kidnappers. The campaign is successful, but it leads to a divide or split between Temujin and his blood brother. So these boys grew up together. It's not his real brother, but it's his blood brother. And they had, they would cut themselves. You probably saw this in old Native American movies, right? They cut themselves and they become blood brothers or something. They share their blood. They had been very, very close. This fellow's name is Jamukha. But they kind of have a falling out because they have a different philosophy, okay? Jamukha, who had his own little tribe, believed in the traditional Mongol aristocracy. In other words, the caste system, where you have the sort of the wealthier, stronger families that have the Khans, and then you've got people below them. One of the successes of Temujin is that he believes in meritocracy. In other words, being promoted or given positions of power based on what you can do, your ability. If you remember, Napoleon did the same thing, right? So you'll find that great leaders tended to go with the meritocracy route. Jamukha and Temujin drifted apart and each began consolidating their own power. Okay, he becomes Khan of the Mongols. So Temujin raided many smaller tribes. And what he would do, though, he would go in and basically defeat them, but he would offer to the warriors, if you come and join my tribe and give your allegiance to me, I'll let you live. Not only that, you have an avenue for advancement with me. And so they did that. A lot of them joined him, and lesser Khans joined him, and really became devoted to him. And this is how he builds his empire, is he quite often will say to the warriors, the defeated warriors, come join me. You know, we're the best. You want to play for the best team? That's us. In 1186, following a shaman's declaration, a shaman is like a medicine man, if you will. It's like a priest. A declaration that the eternal blue sky, okay, which was the religion that these folks followed, the god Tengri had set aside the world for Temujin. So this shaman says to the people, this is the chosen one by the great blue sky. Okay? And so as a result of this and his ability and his growing strength, he actually is elected, and we'll talk about how the elections happen in a minute, Khan of the Mongols, but he's not without opposition. Why'd you go on to, oh, I'm sorry. 1187, you're so quick. 1187, Jamukha attacked and defeated Temujin with an army of 30,000 warriors. So his blood brother attacks him and defeats him. Temujin and his patron, the Khan of the tribe he had allied himself with, are exiled to China and the Jin Dynasty in Western China. Jamukha, though, loses support. Okay, a lot of the Khans, after he boiled alive 70 of Temujin's young warriors he had captured. So he boils them alive, which doesn't go over really well. And there's an honor code amongst the Mongols, which we'll get into a little bit later. 1197, Jamukha helps the Jin Dynasty defeat the Tatars, not the Tartars, the Tatars. And he was rewarded, basically, by being returned to the position of the Khan of the Mongols. Okay? So he gets thrown out by Jamukha, and then he goes to the Jin. He's a great general, helps them defeat an enemy, so they put him back into power with the Mongols. Around 1200, the main rivals of the Mongols, I'm going to show you a map in a minute, so this will be a little bit easier to understand, were the Naimans to the west, the Merkits to the north, the Tanguts to the south, and the Jin to the east. As mentioned earlier, Temujin used a merit system and, of loyalty over the traditional family connections and promoting warriors to positions of authority. He distributed, this is key, okay, this is a key fact, this next one. He distributes to both his warriors or soldiers and the citizens the wealth that he collects, okay? He never, ever builds a castle. In fact, he only goes into one building in his whole life because he was afraid to go into buildings because then he wasn't open to the great blue sky, right? And he doesn't care for, he doesn't the Mongols weren't into all sorts of fancy stuff here. All they wanted basically was to be powerful and grow their empire. So he takes all the money, he sends it back to Mongolia and divides it amongst the people. Okay? And so they're very, very loyal to him. And so that's a real code, a real key to understanding their success. The Yasa Code is a unwritten law code of the Mongols, and it was kind of secret. It was only shared within the Khan's, Genghis's family, royal family, which made it kind of convenient if nobody really knows what the law is. I mean, it was traditional law, but it made it easier to rule. Say, no, that's not the way it is, it's this way this time. But anyway, it was used to ensure both obedience and tribal unity. Falling out with Kongal. So Sengam, Kongal's son, becomes jealous of Temujin's growing power and influence within his father's tribe. And Senjin, with the support of his father, Kongal, plotted to assassinate Temujin. Temujin discovers the plot, defeats Sengam in battle. He's still kind of in a relationship with Kongal, except for he goes to Kongal and says, I want my oldest son, Joki, remember Joki, his firstborn, to marry your daughter. And Kongal refuses. Okay, that's a real, offense to Temujin. So they go to war. Temujin's forces are victorious, and that brings to end basically Togru's tribe, which Temujin completely takes over. Now, defeat of Jamukha. Jamukha had sought refuge with the Naiman Mongols in 1201 and was named Gur Khan, or universal ruler, by a Kuradai, which is a political military council. It's a military council. It's sort of a democratic system, if you will. So the clan chiefs, or clan khans, as they were called, would come together and they would vote. Okay, who's going to be the great Khan? And so in this area, they elect Jamukha. Now, this is a direct challenge to Temujin because he had been chosen the Khan of the Mongols earlier. So, again, war breaks out between the two of them. Several of Jamukha's and the Naiman generals actually defected Temujin, and he's able to defeat Jamukha, and Jamukha's captured. Now, he says to his friend, listen, we were best friends here. All you have to do is pledge allegiance to me, basically, or obedience to me, that you'll work with me and recognize me as the great Khan. And Jamukha says, no. He said, there can't be two suns in the sky, but I demand a royal death. Okay? Now, amongst the Mongols, royal families, it was a bad omen, it was a bad thing to shed a royal's blood. Okay? So what they did was they broke Jamukha's back. That's how they killed him, which to me sounds pretty awful. But anyway, that's how he honored his former friend's wish to die as a noble. He then put Jamukha's men were put to the measuring against the linchpin. Now the Mongols had these large wagons that they would carry their gear on that would follow the army. They had really large wheels. So the linchpin is where the axle and the wheel attach, and there's a pin that goes through that holds the wheel on the axle. So he made Jamukha's men walk beside the wagon, and if you were taller than the linchpin, they instantly cut your head off. So if you were shorter, so that's, if anybody says, we're going to measure you by the linchpin, get the heck out of here. Okay, he becomes Genghis Khan. in 1206, and this is 1206 is the date of the beginning of the Mongol Empire, if you will. Okay. At 1206, Temujin had managed to unite or subdue the Merkits, the name is the Mongols, which were many different tribes, the Curates, the Tatars, and the Uyghurs, and other smaller tribes, and bring them under his rule. Okay. And this is the Uyghurs that you hear about in China today. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. This was a monumental feat and results in the peace between previously warring tribes and a single political and military force. It's actually called Pax Mongolica. Pax meaning peace. So it's the peace of the Mongols. Now, it's not very peaceful, but they're not warring amongst themselves, okay, which is the key here. The union of the tribes became known as the Mongols, or the Mongol Empire, and the Kuradai, which is a council of Mongol chiefs, in Temujin was acknowledged as the Khan, or the great Khan of the consolidated tribes, so he takes the name Genghis Khan. So that's how he gets the name Genghis Khan. Okay, so here we have a map. And okay, so here's the Mongol Empire. Okay, and there's going to be some key things. And these are all different tribes, names of tribes, okay, that he brought together and united. The Khitans are up here. This is the Jin Dynasty down here. This is the Western Xia, okay, which he's going to go to war against the Xia and then the Jin. Over here, here the Uyghurs, okay, and this is a Khitan Khanate. Khanate sort of means it's a political group, a political area controlled by one. We would think of it as, you know, a province or something like that, but with a leader, a Khan that's running them. And of course, Russia would be up here. Okay, religion. Now, I mentioned that he believed in the sky god, the great blue sky god, Tengri, so he's a Tengrist. But the interesting thing about Genghis Khan was, and I think one of the reasons for his success, he was tolerant of other religions. He didn't care what you practiced for religion, and he was actually very, very interested in religion and philosophies and all sorts of new knowledge. We're going to get into this a little bit later in more detail. In 1219, while he was pacifying the Shanxi in China, he learned about Zen Buddhism. And he said this, now he doesn't become a Buddhist himself, but he's very interested, and he meets the leading Buddhist monks, and he orders that they be supplied with food, clothing, and he makes them chiefs. And they were authorized to act as Darkwan, which means possessor of immunity. So what that meant was they were free from paying taxes, and they could move around basically at will, and they weren't to be harassed. He also, in 1222, he becomes interested in Taoism and established Taoist temples in China. So it's kind of interesting. You know, he himself was a Taoist. He was also tolerant of Christianity. Okay. All right, the Mongol cavalry bow and arrows wearing a deal. And we're going to get, I'll show you more specifically in a minute. But horses were everything to the Mongols. It was their transportation. It's also sort of like the buffalo to the Native Americans. Now, I know the Native Americans didn't ride buffalo, but the horses, the Mongolian horses, are a source of food. They're a source of, clothing. As I mentioned earlier, the gurs were made out of hides. And the other thing that they're really good at is archery. I mean, really good at archery. they would tie, and they still do today, young children, toddlers, to a saddle on a horse and teach them how to ride. So basically, almost before they can walk, they were riding horses. And so they're tremendous, and this is going to be an important part. Okay. Military organization. Mongol military tactics and organization allowed the Mongols to capture nearly all of continental Asia, the Middle East, Russia, and parts of Eastern Europe. That's how you get to be the largest contiguous empire in history. Right? The military system was partly based on skills from the nomadic lifestyle, meaning riding horses, tracking, archery, that sort of thing. But also from technologies learned from other cultures. So just as Genghis was interested in other religions, he's interested in technology, especially military technology. And he'll borrow from a lot of people, especially from China. He brought into his armies technical advisors who helped train his armies and traveled with the Mongols on military campaigns. And in many cases, they were able to defeat much larger forces than their own. Now, he builds his military organization on the decimal system, the system of 10. The Mongol military were divided into 4 basic units. So on the left is the name of the military size, on the right is the number of men. So the basic unit is the Arban, which were 10 guys, okay? The Zun were 100. The Ming'an were 1,000, and the Tumen were 10,000, okay? So, and of course, there'd be many Arbans and Zuns and Ming'ans and a Tumen. It was forbidden for warriors to transfer from between any military unit. So if you were in an Arban, you were in the Arban because loyalty to the group was extremely important. Pete?
Can you turn that size unit into U.S.? Is that like a patrol and a company?
Yeah, I think I thought about doing that, but then those numbers have changed over the years. But yeah, so it'd be like a patrol around 10 or 20 guys, but it was 10 here. A company would be around 100, and I'm actually more familiar, I hate to say this, with Civil War group sizes of groups than modern day, but I think they're probably similar. And a regiment would be about 1,000, and then a division would be about 10,000. That makes sense to the military people? Okay. So this is early on, okay, and but very organized. Go ahead. The command structure. The leaders in each level had significant license to execute the orders as best they could, the way they saw fit. For the Mongol army, they could attack in mass, a whole army, 10,000 or many, sometimes they'd be 100,000, so they could just attack in mass. They could divide into smaller groups to encircle or lead the enemy into an ambush, which we'll talk about. They could divide into, the Arban was used after an army was defeated and people were trying to escape for their lives. The Arbans would go out in groups of 10 and chase people down and kill them. And then, although they fought as a unit, individual soldiers were responsible for their own equipment, their weapons, and up to 5 horses each. That's going to be a key. And warriors, the families actually, because they were nomadic, followed the army. Sometimes way behind the army, but they would bring the wagons and whatnot. Okay, Mongolian horses. They play, as I mentioned, a really important role, both in military terms, but also just in the culture of Mongolia. They're in horrible conditions, very, very harsh conditions, but they live outside year-round. They're short. They're 12 to 14 hands, which is pretty short for a horse, but they are horses. They're not ponies. They're stocky, very durable, strong, muscular animals. They maneuver well, but they're not fast. Okay, they're not particularly fast. Now, you know how my wife always does a snack for you? So we're going to have some arag, which is fermented mare's milk. Okay? Is their national drink back then, and it is now as well. Has anybody had arag in here? I haven't either. On lawn campaigns, the warriors would open a vein on their horse and collect the blood and drink it, and then, you know, patch the vein back up. And they could live. Most of their mounts, most of their horses were mares. They could live for, they say, a warrior could live for a full month on just mare's milk and the blood from the horses. When the food supply was scarce. As I said, they each had 3 to 5 horses, and they changed the mounts all the time to keep the horses fresh. They also carried scimitars, which are a curved, long curved knife, if you will. Okay, mobility. Now, the horses provide great mobility, and Genghis Khan, just like you know, the other great generals throughout history, used mobility and surprise attacks to win a lot. Okay, so they could travel up to 100 miles a day on these horses by switching over the mounts. They're all great equestrians. They shoot arrows with great accuracy at full gallop, including they could spin, and I think I've got a picture of the saddle in a minute. They could spin and shoot backwards very accurately at full gallop. They learned the art of making lightweight armor, which I'll show you in a minute, from the Chinese, and they wore it, and over time their horses were somewhat protected as well. They would have scouts that could go out on horseback, sent to gather intelligence on terrain and enemy positions. During the invasion of Russia, Kiev and Rus, they used the frozen rivers as highways. Now the Russians are like, nobody attacks, nobody leaves and goes out and fights in the middle of a Russian winter. Well, the Mongols did. They just rode right down the frozen rivers and would all of a sudden show up and win the battle. They use large drums and flags to communicate and maneuver during battles. So on the left is a armor, a chest plate, if you will. It's actually made of leather that's soaked to make it hard, and then they would trim it and then paint it with shellac to make it waterproof and again harder. And then they would use various materials. Sometimes they actually use metal to connect the pieces together, or rawhide. On the right would be what a Mongol warrior would look at like. So the curved piece that looks like a bird's head or something, kind of neck and head coming up out of the back, is actually a bow. They used composite bows that were very, very powerful weapons. This fellow has an axe in his right hand, a scimitar, a shield, again made out of this leather material. The boots I found to be interesting. They, of course, were leather, but then they would have fur inside the boots and felt inside around their feet to keep themselves warm in the wintertime. So pretty formidable. And the thing about the Mongol army, when they went against the Russians and Europeans, the knights, coming out in these big metal, robot-like suits, the Mongols can maneuver and move, and they're lightweight. They don't fatigue nearly as quickly. Their training, the Mongol armies practiced horsemanship, archery, unit tactics, formations, and rotations over and over and over again. So they really practiced. This was not just a wild group. This was a very organized army. And the training was maintained by hard but not overly harsh discipline, which basically gave them leeway to be able to make their own decisions. That's one of the things that we pride with the United States military, is that each soldier can actually operate on his own if he has to. You hear stories in World War II or Korea or Vietnam where an officer's killed, next man up is the leader, and they're same with the Mongols. Okay. The orders had to be, though, they were given leeway, but they had to carry out their mission and obey orders promptly. There was unconditional loyalty to their superiors, to their unit, and to the Khan. And if one man fled in fear or in danger during a battle, the whole R-band was executed. His 9 comrades died with him, were executed with him. So it was a real, as I said, they weren't allowed to trade R-bands. They were really loyal to each other. Logistics. They traveled light, mostly lived off the land. They carried fish hooks. They ate air-dried horse meat, or like horse jerky instead of beef jerky, which they would reconstitute in boiling water if they could. Now, if they're on a fast, march or going someplace, they're in battle, and they couldn't do that. They would take the strips of horse meat, the dried horse meat, and put it on the horse's back under the saddle, and leave it under the saddle, and the heat of the horse would reconstitute, and the sweat of the horse would reconstitute the food. How come you're shaking your heads? Yeah. Doesn't sound, these guys were tough. Okay. One of their biggest concerns, though, was actually forage for their horses. They had some huge armies, and they did use siege techniques where they would surround the city for sometimes up to a year. And the biggest problem is they deplete all the grass in the area for their horses to eat on. So that was always a problem. So I mentioned the flags and drums. They also, Genghis Khan also established what he called yams, which were basically long distance. Think of it as a Pony Express, really. That's really what it was, but just, 400 or 500 years earlier than the Pony Express, where they had what they call postal stations, where there'd be fresh horses and food and water and whatnot. So the rider could come, and exchange a horse, or have a fresh rider take the message on further. So they could really increase the speed of written messages, which is, of course, key in battle as well. The wagon trains, which I mentioned, carried heavier equipment, including siege weapons. They had catapults, things like that. They had, basically, I don't want to use the term factories, because they weren't in buildings, but they had groups that were specialized in making armor, making their scimitars, making arrows, and they would carry extras all the time on wagons, huge amounts of these. And the women performed many of the tasks, including setting up and breaking down camps, and then transporting the supplies on the wagons. Psychological warfare. They were great at this. The Mongols used psychological warfare in many of their battles. It worked especially well if they were going against a sedentary, people who live in a town or a city. So they would come up to a town or a city, and the first thing, they'd surround it, or come up to the front gate and say, okay, we're the Mongols, we're here. Do you want to surrender? Okay? And if you were smart, you surrendered. Okay? But if you didn't surrender, they would then, attack. We'll talk about the specific methods in a minute. If you surrendered, you just had to agree to pay tribute, basically, and give them supplies. But if they refused, they were then ransacked and destroyed. And the Mongols knew that sedentary people who lived in these towns or cities or within walls, were really afraid of losing their towns and cities. They didn't have nomadic skills. Now, back when he was facing nomadic tribes, those guys could just take off and they could live off the land. Well, people who live in towns and cities don't have those skills, so it was really a real fear to lose your town or your city. When the cities accepted the offer, they were spared, but were required to support the Mongol army with manpower, supplies, and services. So that he would take young men out of the city and make them into warriors. If they refused, he would invade, destroy the city or town, but he would always allow a few civilians to escape. And they would run to the next city or town and say, "You're not going to believe what the Mongols did to our city or town." So that's the psychological warfare. So when he showed up, his reputation preceded him. Battle tactics. So the Tumen, once the enemy was located, the Tumen would advance typically 5 rows deep. It's 10,000 men, 5 rows deep. The first 3 rows would be horse-mounted archers, the bow and arrow guys, and the next 2 lines would be men mounted on horses with lances, which are spears, basically. And the archers were basically, think of it as artillery, right? They'd soften up the enemy, then the lancers would come in and finish them off. They avoided costly frontal attacks whenever possible. They used a lot of diversionary tactics. Outflank, which of course, we've talked about that before, it's when you attack from the sides, okay? Or they would surround the enemy. They also used very successfully a feigned retreat. So they would come up to a city or a town or their enemy and be fighting and look like they were all disorganized, and then they would all kind of panic and run around and yell and retreat. Okay? And hopefully, and it worked a lot, the defenders would chase them and say, "Oh, we got these guys where we want them, and we're going to chase them." And what they would do is they would get them away from their defenses and then bring in on the flanks and turn around and attack. Sometimes they would, this diversionary tactic, they would run for up to a week with the defenders chasing them until they were totally exhausted, the defenders, and then they'd be easily killed off. So really, really brilliant. And they use siege as well, which is you surround, starve out the enemy. Okay. His early government, okay, this is before it really becomes an empire. The Mongols in society and government were based on clans, which I mentioned, which were basically family groups and extended family groups. The clans would combine into tribes. Now, under Genghis Khan, all clans and tribes came together and they owed him allegiance, really strong allegiance to him without question. So he was an absolute ruler. But he did have the laws that I mentioned earlier that he did follow. These tribes met at vast assemblies called kuritais, which we mentioned before. Those were actually social gatherings as well as kind of a parliamentary style political election for the tribal leaders, signaling the beginning of the empire. As I mentioned before, Genghis Khan was elected Great Khan in 1206 by a kuritai. The kuritai would also be a consultative body advising the Great Khan and electing new ones when he died, and his sons and grandsons. They hold kuritais. And even after the formation of the Mongolian Empire, the clan and the kuritai assembly remained an integral part of Mongolian politics. Yes, Pete.
I'm sorry, I should have asked this, a couple of slides ago, but they are attacking who? And when they say, "Hey, surrender," what's the language barrier?
That's a good question. They would have interpreters. Okay, they were interpreters. They typically would capture people, capture somebody and say, "Okay, you're going to be our our interpreter. And they would develop these guys and actually treat them pretty well as long as they worked with them. So we're going to get into who they're attacking in a minute and talk a little bit more about that. Okay? That's a good question. Okay, the political structure of the empire. So after his rise, as I said, in the early part of the 13th century, he adapted the politics to rule the empire. Again, he's an absolute power. He replaces former leaders with loyal military commanders. So when he took over an area, he would typically actually kill the rulers of that area unless they had really cooperated and put in a military commander for the area. He created army divisions, new army divisions out of diverse tribal and ethnic groups. He implemented an imperial guard that was really highly specialized soldiers called the Khitan, which protected and carried out his orders. He was advised by tribal leaders that the Kuratai had mentioned, and he had several other administrative positions as a group. These were based on meritocracy, as we mentioned, and were not hereditary. There were prime ministers called Beg and ministers viziers, which is probably a term you've heard before, who advised the great Khan. There were military governors, were appointed on the conquered lands to collect the taxes, recruit soldiers, and settle disputes. Now the taxes, again, started off, when he started off early, that was just, he would just take some of the herd. That was he had to give him so many horses or sheep or goats or whatever. And then as time went on and they started taking over wealthy communities or wealthy regions, they would collect money and riches and then distribute it again to all the people in the society. And so these new positions, these new political positions enabled him to basically, a lot of times you'll get a guy who's a really good soldier, but he's not a good administrator. And, they run into serious problems trying to win the peace. And we have recent history in the United States for that. Treatment of conquered people. So the foreign people, when he conquered a foreign people, he often executed the political leaders and their families. The citizens who survived were allowed to continue their way of life and practice their own religion, practice their own culture, really didn't interfere much. Just pay the taxes. Keep on sending me the wealth. Do what I tell you to do. You can keep your town, you can keep your city. I don't care about any of that. He would take craftsmen, philosophers, I put scientists in quotation marks, meaning there were astronomers and mathematicians and all these people that he was very interested in. He would bring them to court. When he took over the Middle East, they were particularly good in math. I think they wore badges, capital letters that said math on them. And a little Andrew Yang joke. And he set them up in charge of the empire's finances. They were the tax collectors and would control the money and distribute the money and take care of it because they were really good in math. Okay, the Mongol Empire expands. Again, I know these look crazy, but it's just so this is where he starts off, okay? And this area here is actually the tribes that he takes over, the Mongol tribes. Again, the Jin Dynasty, this is Korea, the future Beijing. The Western Shi, so we're going to see him take the Western Shi and the Jin Dynasty. This is the Khitan, and then the Khwarezmian Empire, which goes down into the Middle East. Okay, I'm just showing you this so you have something reference as we talk about these different places, and of course Russia up there. And these are all actually within his lifetime. Okay, so this is it must be from a movie on the top. It's a photograph of the line of attack, and these look like they have lances, spears, not so much bows and arrows. And then the bottom slide is an artistic rendition of an attack on a fortified wall. Looks like it's in China. You see they have ladders, but they have siege catapults, siege engines that they would construct on site. They actually had some explosive bombs. They had some handheld, think of them as hand grenades. They would use boulders to knock the walls down. So they were very technical. One of the historians I read as I was preparing for this lecture talked about the Mongols and Genghis Khan. He says, think of them as a terrorist organization with modern American weapons. And I don't fully agree with this third part, but with Adolf Hitler in charge. This megalomaniac who wants to take over the world. And so that's what the Mongols were to their time period. He said, if you think about that today, how truly terrifying that would be. That was the Mongols. Okay, the Western Xia and Jin Dynasties. So he comes to power in 1206, as I mentioned, and he shares a border with the Western Xia. And he goes, oh, they're rich. They'd be a good vassal state. So right away in 1206, he starts to attack them. But in 1209, he attacks them in force. And it's his first move towards taking over all of China. Now, he actually doesn't fully take over all of China. His grandson is the one who actually eventually succeeds in controlling all of China and Korea. So anyways, China was not unified at this time. There were a number of regional dynasties. So Genghis predicted that the young emperor of the Jin, if you remember they were part of just north of the Western Xia, would not defend. Now the Xia were a vassal state to the Jin, so the Jin really should have protected the Xia, but they didn't. So he does a year-long siege at Yinshan, and finally the Xia emperor submits and becomes a vassal to Genghis Khan in 1210. 1211, he gets the Xia to go with him and fight against the Jin. Okay, and basically what's going to become Mongolia, not Mongolia, Manchuria, excuse me, northern China. So after a Jin messenger defects to the Mongols, informing Genghis Khan of the Jin's military plans, he's able to sweep around the mountains, surprise them, and kill 100,000 of them, forcing the emperor of the Jin capital at Zhongdu, which is modern-day Beijing, forcing him to leave Beijing or Zhongdu and move to a new capital. They're not going to fully control the Jin until 1234, which is actually after Genghis Khan's death. So they're going to be fighting a long time. His third son, Ogadai Khan, defeats the Jin, and then his grandson will take over. Mongol expansion. Again, I'm just showing you the map again, so you can see the Western Xia and the Jin. Now switch over sort of right in the middle of the map, the Kara Khitan. You see that? Okay. And then to the left of the Kara Khitan is the Khwarezmian Empire. So those are our next two targets. Okay, Mongol conquest of the Kara Khitan. After Genghis' defeat in 1203 of the Naimans, which was one of the Mongol tribes, their leader, Kuchlug, fled west and usurped the Khanate of the Kara Khitan, which is present-day Kyrgyzstan. Okay, Kyrgyzstan was one of the Soviet states. Now, in 1216, the Mongols were exhausted after fighting 10 years in China, so he only sends 2 Tumans, 20,000 men, who were to go out and take over Kara Khitan. It's under this general Jebe, who had been a slave and worked his way up from being a slave to a leading general, one of Genghis Khan's leading general. But the Tumen of 20, or the two Tumens of 20,000 men are able to defeat Kerchluck's 30,000 man army, and they then go and do a siege around the Khitan capital, and Kulig's people turn against him. Well, it turns out Kulig was a Buddhist, and the people of Khitan were Muslims, and he had been not respecting their religion and persecuting them. So they take him and throw him out of the city, and he takes off with a few men and run. He just ran, and they finally catch up with him in Afghanistan, where he's captured and executed. Now, Khitan becomes a vassal state, but that's not even the important part. The important part is that now Genghis Khan, okay, has a strong foothold next to the very wealthy Khwarezmian Empire, okay, this Islamic empire. So Mongol invasion of Khwarezmia. It's a Muslim empire, and it's led by Shah al-Din Muhammad, better known as Muhammad II, and was a wealthy trading nation on the Silk Road. Genghis originally wanted Khwarezmia as a trading partner and sent a 500-man caravan to establish trade, sort of a trade mission. Well, they come to the first Khwarezmian city, and the governor of the city attacks the caravan and says, "No, you guys are spies." Takes all their stuff, okay? So Genghis Khan sent him a message and said, "You gotta, we weren't spies, we were just here to trade, you owe us some money for what you stole." They refused. So he sends 3 ambassadors directly to the Shah, Muhammad II, to work out a trade deal. Well, the Shah takes them, captures basically the 3 ambassadors, shaves their heads, and 2 of them are Mongols, one's a Muslim, decapitates the Muslim's head, decapitates him, gives the head to the other 2 ambassadors and says, "Take this back to Genghis Khan." Kind of a mistake, kind of a big mistake. So he's, of course, furious, he's outraged, he sends 10 Tumens, 100,000 people to invade. And there are 3 columns. Jokai, his oldest son, comes in from the northeast. Jebai, that slave general, comes in from the southeast. And they do a pincer attack on Samarkand, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the 3rd division, under Genghis Khan, himself and his youngest son, Tululai, march northwest and attack Khwarezmia from that direction. Well, the Shah is going to be easily defeated, so he takes off, and Genghis Khan says, okay, to his couple of generals, take your Tumens, 20,000 men. I don't care if it takes you 2 years, catch this guy, okay? And so they chase him. They didn't actually catch him, but they kept on surrounding. He disappeared, and then he dies, and they don't really know how he died. The conquest of Khwarezmia. Samarkand fell, which was the capital, and Genghis Khan ordered 2 of his generals and their forces to completely destroy the remnants of the capital, including not only the royal buildings, but the entire town's populations and even vast swaths of farmland. Now this is Samarkand is the only time that he goes into a building. He wants to go into a mosque. They had this huge mosque. I want to see what they're all talking about, these mosques. So he goes in, he's really nervous because he can't see the sky, and then he destroys it all. The people of Samarkand were ordered to evacuate, assemble outside the city, and where they were all killed by severing their heads, and they made a pyramid out of their heads. The city just to the west of Samarkand, Bukhara, which of course is still a city, fell. The artisans and craftsmen were sent back to Mongolia. The young men who had not fought were drafted into the Mongolian army, and the rest of the population was sent into slavery. City of Urgent is slaughtered, which is a very wealthy city on the And they stood up, they fought against Genghis Khan. And ends up being fighting within the city. The Mongols were not good at fighting in cities. They didn't have the tactics. So they lose a lot of men and high casualties. So he is furious. Again, he takes the artisans and sends them back to Mongolia. The young women and children were given to Mongol soldiers as slaves, and the rest of the population is massacred. A Persian scholar by the name of Juvanye states that 50,000 Mongol soldiers were given the task of executing 24 citizens each. If you do the math, that's 1.2 million people were killed in that city. Okay, succession. We're almost to our break. And then it's much shorter after that. The way it flowed, I didn't want to stop before we get to the end of Genghis. So as he grows older, of course, succession becomes important to his 4 sons. Jokai, as the oldest, would normally become the great Khan, but of course there's the issue of his paternity. So the second son openly challenges Jokai, and just before they invade Khwarezmia, he tells Genghis Khan, your other sons and I are not going to honor or accept Jokai as our leader. So Genghis Khan's worried about that the two of them are going to cause a civil war and end his empire. So he announces that his third son, Ogadai, will be his successor. 1226, Jokai actually dies. He's sent off to Russia to be in charge of the Russia, the Horde, as they were called. We'll get to that in a minute. And he dies. So Genghis divided his empire into 4 parts, giving each son his own canon. The death. Okay, he actually dies. They think there's all sorts of different theories on how he died, but they think he died by falling off a horse at age 65 when he is out hunting. Before his death, he wanted to be buried in the Mongolian style, which is to be taken into the wilderness near where he was born and basically left, which they did. Supposedly, they killed anybody they came across on the path to bury Genghis Khan, to conceal his final burial place. The entire area, which I found very interesting, was off limits to anybody. It was guarded. I mean, this is a huge area, like thousands of square miles, off limits to anybody, including when the Soviets took over Mongolia. They kept it off limits. They did it for a different reason, though. They did it because they were afraid that Genghis Khan is still considered the great, leader of the Mongols, and they were afraid that the Mongol people, if they could get to his burial site, it would start a nationalist independence movement against the Soviet Union. Okay. All right, let's take a break. Okay, so the 4 Khanates, as I had mentioned, Khanates, which Genghis Khan divided his empire among his sons. The first is and I'll show you a map, we'll just run through who they are first. Empire of the Great Khan, which is Ogadai Khan. As Great Khan, he took most of Eastern Asia, including China. This territory later was become the Yuan dynasty, which we did 2 talks ago, if you remember, on China 1 under Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan was not Ogadai's son, he was actually Kublai's son. The Mongol homeland, the present-day Mongolia, including Karakorum. Karakorum is the city that's built, but after Genghis's death. Genghis, as I mentioned at the beginning, didn't believe in building towns or anything, permanent structures. Went to Tululai, being the youngest son. He received a small territory, but according to Mongol custom, he actually received most of the army. He received more than 100,000 men. Really bright guy, an alcoholic. So he's going to die from alcoholism. He just can't get enough of that air egg. Chagatai Khanate. Chagatai was the second son and was given Central Asia, including northern Persia or Iran. And then there's the Blue Horde, who went to Batu Khan. A lot of people have heard of Batu, the Blue Horde. And the White Horde, which was Batu's brother, Orda Khan. They were both later combined into the Kipchak Khanate, or the Golden Horde, as they were known. I know that's really confusing. They received this. They were the sons of Jokai, if you remember, who dies before his father. And so they have Russia, basically, Ruthenia, which is like Eastern Europe. And as I said here, the land is split between Batu and Orda, and they launched an invasion of Russia and later Hungary and Poland, and crushed several armies being summoned before being summoned back to Ogedai's death. So a gentleman came up and said, well, they almost got into Western Europe, and they did come close, and the Western Europeans were terrified of the Mongols. But two things happened. One, Genghis Khan dies. They all have to go back to this huge Kuratai in Mongolia, and then the Black Plague also occurs, which basically stopped them. Okay, we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so here's the map. So we have the four Khanates. We have the Great Khan, as I mentioned, which becomes the Yuan dynasty of China. Chagatai in Central Asia. The Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe. And then the Ilkhanate, which is not on that other list. We're going to talk about how that gets formed next. But you can see the location. Now, India, because of the mountains, okay, they never get to India. Though one of his descendants will bring Islam to India. We'll talk about that right now. Okay, Kolyuai, after his death, he becomes the interim Great Khan, if you will. He doesn't actually take the title Great Khan, but until they can get the Kuradai together, which takes about a year and a half to get everybody to come together to elect, or 2 years, to elect the new Great Khan, he's sort of in charge. He does a good job with that. He supports the choice of the next Kagan, which is another name for the Great Khan, by election, and Ogedai was chosen, fulfilling his father's wishes. Though more importantly than Tolai himself, as I just mentioned that he was an alcoholic, he's actually going to die fairly young. But his family, his kids, have a huge impact. His family, which are known as the Tolaids, in shaping the destiny of the Mongol Empire. Now here comes an important woman, very important woman, is his wife. She's a Nestorian Christian. Nestorian is a small Christian sect. And I tried to learn about how it's different in Christianity. And I think, from what I could glean, it's different as their relationship with Jesus and God and Mary in particular. They've got some questions about that, so that separates them from normal Christianity. Should have asked my daughter, who is a professor of religions, and I didn't. These things always come to me. I say, oh man, that would have been a good idea. But anyways, Sorgatani Bekai is her name, and she becomes one of the most powerful and confident people in the Mongol Empire. After her husband dies, her sons are still really young. She's sort of the regent, if you will, for the empire. And they had 4 sons, Monk, Kublai, Erekbok, and Hulako are the 4 sons. I'm glad they're not here, because I'm sure they chopped my head off with the pronunciation of their names.
You said there were 4 sons and you have 5 names.
Erekbok is the same person.
One.
Yeah. Erekbok.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay. The first 3 of these would all go on to claim the title of the Great Khan. And Hulagu founded the Ilkhanate, and Kublai the Yuan dynasty in China. Okay, so let's look at the Ilkhanate. Establishing the Ilkhanate. Okay, so Hulagu, son of Kublai and grandson of Genghis, was tasked with conquering the Abbasid Caliphate. Now, if you were here for my Middle Eastern, two-part Middle Eastern talk, which I think was last year about this time, the Abbasids were a huge Islamic dynasty. Their capital was in Baghdad, but they controlled Persia, which of course is Iran, down through Afghanistan, really down into part of Pakistan, part of Iraq, modern-day Iraq, up through Syria, and then into the Asian side of Turkey. So, and they also controlled part of northern Africa, and they were the ones that went into Spain and Portugal. So they really spread Islam. By the time we get to this time, though, they very much become weakened. They're living this great lifestyle, if you will, in Baghdad. They have huge harems. They brought in people who are not Arabs, which was very controversial. They were Muslims, but they weren't from the Arab Peninsula. So a lot of Muslims were upset at them for that. So they're kind of weakened by the time the Mongols showed up. So Hulagu Khan shows up and captures and destroys much of Baghdad. I didn't have time. I spent the time on Karakoram and the other cities, but this was a huge slaughter as well. In 1258, marking the end of what's known as the Islamic Golden Age. To avoid Mongol aversion of the spilling blood, Hulagu had the caliph, who was the leader, al-Mustasam, wrapped in a carpet and then trampled to death by horses. So he was in the carpet, you couldn't see the blood, everything was good. Okay. His immediate family was also executed, with the lone exceptions of his youngest son, who was sent back to Mongolia, and a daughter who became a slave in the harem of Hulagu. Hulagu's descendants are going to rule Persia for the next 80 years, but they tolerate multiple religions, including shamanism, Buddhism, Christianity, and they ultimately adopt Islam in 1295. Okay, the legacy. So what does this all mean? Okay, why are we talking about this? Why is this important? So I mentioned the Pax Mongolica, which basically was reached in 1221, and again, that's within the Mongolia, the Mongolian tribes. So I know that they're out killing and murdering and conquering the rest of the area. The Mongol Empire, which was actually from 1206 to 1368, at its height was the largest contiguous, which I had mentioned before, and I think you've seen that. Genghis Khan introduced the Uyghur alphabet and written language to the Mongols, and it's still used today. Charles had asked me, well, they must have had a written language. Well, they adopted one, the Uyghur language, for their postal system. Moscow grew in importance as a result of the Mongol rule in Kiev and Rus. Kiev and Rus was located, of course, around Kiev, or Kiev, whichever way you want to say it. So the Mongols come in, and as I said, they attacked them, they conquered them, and then they said, just give us tribute. So the Russian strongmen, basically, they're called the princes, but they're really just warlords, say, okay, we'll collect the taxes for you and send you the money. Don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. You guys go have a good life, and we'll take care of it and send you the money. Which happens for about 200 years. But this changes Russia, okay, because it does a couple of things. It creates the Russian aristocracy. So these princes who are collecting the money become wealthy and powerful. It also creates serfdom. Okay, and if you remember, serfdom is kind of like slavery, except for you are owned to the land, not personally. It's not a chattel situation where you can be bought and sold personally, but the land can be bought and sold. But serfdom comes out of this time period. It's the poor people who couldn't afford to pay the taxes to the aristocrats, so they become their serfs, which of course has a huge impact on Russian history. Ivan III, who was known as Ivan the Great, who was the father of Ivan the Terrible, in 1450 became strong enough to throw off the Mongol yoke, creating Imperial Russia and making the Grand Duchy of Moscow independent. So that's a big deal in Russian history. The other thing that historians talk about a lot, and I used to talk about a lot as a history teacher, is because of the Mongols. Of course, the Europeans didn't want anything to do with the Mongols, so they stayed away from Russia. Russia is cut off from a whole development of Western thought, Western philosophy. We say that the Mongols are thrown out by 1450 and the Renaissance starts around 1500, but still they're isolated. It's not until Peter the Great comes along in the 18th century and says, wait a minute, we missed a whole lot, we have to catch up. And that was a lot to do with the Mongols. So politically and philosophically. Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, is an absolute ruler still. There hadn't been absolute rule for a couple hundred years, or 150 years in mainland and in England for many, many hundreds of years. Okay, 1340s, the Mongol army carried the Black Death. They were going from China to Kaffa on the Crimean Peninsula. And that Kaffa was controlled by the Genoese traders who fled because the Mongols were coming and took with them the bubonic plague, the Black Plague, and spread it through, ships. They were merchants throughout Europe, leading to 75 to 200 million deaths worldwide, 50 million deaths. About a third of the European population dies of the Black Plague. Trade in the Silk Road. This is one of the things that really got me interested. What do you think, honey? Should we do a vacation on the Silk Road? Think the Honda CR-V will do it? So trade along the Silk Road and other routes came completely under Mongol control. The Silk Road had existed for a long time, but it wasn't organized, if you will. Okay, so the trade and exchange of knowledge between China, the Middle East, and Europe is going to flourish, really because of the Mongols and the Silk Road. Now, merchants had been looked down upon by, in Chinese society and Islamic society. Genghis Khan comes along and says, no, the merchants are important, okay? So he's actually going to support them and protect them. He sets up these postal stations along the Silk Road, about every 20 miles apart, to provide protection, shelter, food, food for the horses and the travelers. The Mongols initiated I'm not sure how to pronounce this, the Ortok maybe, which was pretty cool. It's a merchant association. Now this is in the first half of the 13th century, or mid of the 13th century, right? Which is to help merchants who were in business on long-distance trade. So obviously, even under the control of the Mongols, it was very dangerous to do the Silk Road. There were still bandits, there were natural, disasters and things like that would happen. What this was, it would bind together 50 to 100 merchants that would share the risk, okay? So if I'm a merchant and I lose my stuff, my fellow, 80 or 90 merchants come to my aid so I don't go bankrupt, okay? And then I would do it for the next person along the line. So it wasn't just a physical protection, it was actually a financial deal for protection. It was a shared risk, sort of like the corporation or the concept of of stocks today. You invest in a company, so if the company goes broke, you only lose your little amount of your stocks, or your big amount of your stocks. They also increased the availability of paper money. They issued letters of credit, so they didn't have to carry gold and silver. They would have letters of credit they could produce saying, I have this wealth in such and such a place behind me. The result was, they reduced the tariffs on the merchants. The result was extraordinary increase in trade across and throughout Eurasia. And Europe becomes much, much more knowledgeable about China. Columbus is actually sent off to try to find a route to Cathay, and Cathay was actually part of the Mongol China at the time. Okay, Mongol destruction leads to demographic changes. So it is estimated that between 30 and 80 million people died under Mongol rule. The population of China fell by half during the 50 years of Mongol rule. Before the Mongol invasion, the territories of China, of the Chinese dynasty reportedly had about 120 million inhabitants. And then after the conquest was completed, the 1300 census reported they had a population of 60 million. Now, a lot of historians dispute this and say it wasn't just Mongol rule. You had the Black Plague that occurred during this time period, and also the Mongols weren't the best at record keeping, so they might have just not counted a lot of people. But still, a lot of people are going to die as a result. Mongols' impact on Persia, Russia, and Hungary. So the Islamic world was subject to massive changes as a result of the Mongol invasions. The population of the Persian plateau suffered from disease and famine. Now, why disease and famine being blamed on the Mongols? Well, they would come in and destroy the cities, right? And so the people, and steal the food and everything else, so the people that were left would starve and be subject to these awful results. And 3/4 of the population, or up to 3/4 of the population, 10 to 15 million people perished. Historian Stephen Ward estimates that Iran's population did not reach pre-Mongol levels until the mid-20th century. Think about that. Atlas of the World Population in 1978 estimated that the population of Russia in Europe dropped, this is European Russia, dropped from 7.5 million to about 7 million, so about 500,000. And historians estimate that half of Hungary's 2 million people were victims of the Mongol invasion. So it had a big impact on the demographics, on the number of people. And when you add that with the Black Plague. Okay, religion of the Mongols. 1241, Mongol attacks of Hungary and Poland frightened Pope Innocent IV enough to send 2 Franciscan missionaries to the east in an attempt to either convert the Mongols to Christianity or come to achieve some sort of rapprochement, an agreement with the Mongols. They aren't successful with either, but they come back with a lot of information about the Mongol Empire. And one is that they discovered that the Nestorian Christianity, which I had mentioned earlier, which had been banned in the 5th century in Europe, was alive and well throughout Mongolia. Marco Polo, thank you. Old camp counselors here, right? Yeah. Mentions visiting hundreds of churches and seeing thousands of Christians during his travels throughout the Mongol Empire between 1271 and 1295. So Christianity spread, Islam spreads. Islam. Okay, the earliest evidence of Islam in Mongolia dates to 1254, when the Franciscan William of, it looks like Rubruck, visited the court of the great Khan at Karakoram. He saw 2 mosques and along with an historian Christian church and 7 temples of say it for me. Idolaters. I practiced that, and I knew I was going to come up with it. Thank you. Idolaters. Or possibly Buddhist or Hindu, Taoist or Taoist temples. The Mongols brought Muslims from Central Asia to China, attacked as administrators, I mentioned as tax collectors and financial managers. After Genghis's death, the 3 western khanates of his sons actually convert to Islam, mainly because of their populations. They were ruling people that were Muslim who were very devout, and they needed to share in that religion to be successful. The Mughal Empire in India, founded by Babur, who was the descendant of Timur or Tamerlane, same guy, who's descended on his mother's side from Genghis Khan. Everybody following this? But anyways, so Babur, who brings is the Islamic religion to India, is a descendant of Genghis Khan on his mother's side. Okay, so we'll have our little discussion in a minute, but I wanted to share with you the sources I use, because I find this stuff fascinating. May I borrow this book again? Well, first of all, the secret history of the Mongols was written for the royal family. It was anonymous. They don't know who wrote it, around the end of the 14th century. So it was definitely after Genghis's death, basically after the fall of the Mongol Empire. And that was the ultimate source that everybody uses. Now, the other way, and a ton of the information about the Mongols don't come from the Mongols. It comes from the Chinese. It comes from the Islamic nations. It comes from the Europeans that traveled to Mongolia. And they all wrote, and like the Chinese kept fantastic records. So a lot of the history of the Mongols actually comes from other people who were conquered by them, writing about the experience. So the book, Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, that's this book, and this was sort of my Bible for the talk, all right? And it's on, either obviously as a paperback or it's on Kindle, pretty inexpensive on Kindle. It's by Jack Weatherford. And then I really enjoy historic novels. I don't know if people enjoy historic novels, but this fellow, Khan Igulden, I guess, he's a New York Times best-selling author, has written 5 books called the Conqueror series on Genghis Khan and the Mongols. It's really good, historically very accurate. He uses this other book as a source, and so it really reads well. He also did one on the Roman Empire and one other empire. The War of the Roses, not the Empire, the War of the Roses. So, anyways, Khan Igulden, and he's available on Amazon or any of the bookstores. It's a big time off, but they're really good books if you're interested in learning more about that. So, we can put that slide back up in a minute. I just want to go to the question quick. We've got about 5 minutes. You hit it twice. Just go back. Yeah, discussion. So, the essential question was examining Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire from a modern perspective. Were the Mongols more successful imperialists in the 19th and 20th centuries?
Yes.
Okay, sir, nice and loud so people can hear.
It's a given. I mean, they conquered most, 2/3 of the known world at that point, aside from the Americas.
Okay, so we say it's obvious that they were more successful. Okay, somebody else? Yes, sir.
Well, they didn't cross the ocean to make conquest, so they did miss the Western Hemisphere.
They did miss the Western Hemisphere. In fact, they were terrible once they got on water. They tried to invade Japan, and the storm came along and wiped them out, and that actually leads to the start of their downfall. Between that and the Black Plague is what really does them in, is they get overextended. When they went into China, Ogedei's son, what's his name? It's not coming to me. Who actually creates the Sung Empire, put a rule in. He said, okay, the Mongols, the Chinese, and we talked about this when we did China in the fall, was if they're being conquered, they would kind of say, okay, you win for a while, but we have so many people, and our civilization our country is based on our civilization that's so strong that eventually you will become us. Okay? So the Great Khan comes into China, the Sung Dynasty, and says to the Mongols, you can't marry Chinese. Okay? You can't become, we're not going to be, assimilated. Thank you. Into the Chinese culture. And it works for a while, but eventually they're assimilated in the Chinese culture. Yes, sir?
One more comment. Europe moved east and went from China. China did not go west and went from Europe.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the main points actually in China when we were talking about that, is China really didn't try to reach out. Now why? Okay, so it's a given, as this gentleman said, that they were more successful in the 19th and 20th century imperialists, but why? What is it about the Mongols that made them such a successful imperialist force? Sir?
Well, they accepted the culture and religion of the people that they conquered.
Absolutely. Okay, so they didn't try to change the people. Mrs. Fawcett. That's good. You're going to. No, I don't believe it. Yeah, so they didn't try to change the people. Okay, and we saw, of course, when the Europeans go into Africa, what are they going to do? They colonize, but they try to change them. You got to become Christian. You got to start wearing pants in church. You got to start using money rather than bartering. You got to, accept our culture. Sir.
Well, weren't the Mongols, they were successful for a short time militarily, but they were a failure culturally. That they got assimilated into the different areas. Their system, the great empire, broke up after just a few years. Maybe the comparison is more with Alexander's empire that spread across all of the steppes into Asia and the Middle East, and then broke up into the different kingdoms. But Alexander was more successful than them because he Hellenized every place he went. They didn't Mongolize the places that they went, so I think they're really a failure.
Okay, so interesting. I think a lot of people probably didn't hear his comment. He's actually disagreeing, so no, he thinks that they're less successful just because of the fact they didn't, and the term used, Mongolize, which is a decent term, I think, the places they took over. So they didn't really have a culture that they brought in, but they were just great warriors and conquerors. But they didn't change anybody, and they are, in fact, assimilated. Even in China, that's what happens. They're assimilated. And certainly in the Middle East.
We speak English today. We don't speak Mongolian.
Very good evidence. Hard to fight with. Hard to fight with that evidence. The spread of Islam, I know, because they were accepting. I mean, that's one of the ways Islam spread and Christianity spreads through some of these regions, is that they were accepting, so people could actually practice their religion within the Mongolian Empire without any persecution. Okay?
Didn't they have more people, maybe, than Alexander? I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Yeah, I don't think so. There were never that many people. They brought a lot of people into their military, but then a lot of people died in their military too. So the next lecture is April 9th. It's Charles Davis, Dr. Davis, came up with this suggestion. I kind of liked it, so I'm going to do it. And I hope people are going to be interested. We've been spending a lot of time in Asia for the last year and a half. Okay, so we're going to come back to the Americas. And what he's interested in is the early colonies. You know, when we think of colonies in New England, what are we going to say? Right? Plymouth colony, you know, Connecticut, New Hampshire, you know, the different colonies. But there were actually a whole bunch of little colonies. There was New Haven colony. There was Hartford colony. There was a Dover colony in New Hampshire, who it turns out my 9th great-grandfather was the governor of. Okay, which I just discovered in my genealogy search. Thomas Roberts. He was the governor of it for exactly 2 years before they get assimilated into a greater colony. So we're going to look at all these little colonies. And of course, in New York, you had the Dutch in there. We'll look at that and sort of look at their governments, and we'll look also at, we'll examine how they financed it. The British companies that financed all this. So this time period, probably from about 1600 to go up to, I'll probably take it up and bring them, start to bring them to get the consolidation, which is really, I think Plymouth colony becomes part of Massachusetts colony in 1692, something like that. So I'll probably come up to about the end of the 16th century. So does that look interesting? Yeah. One thing, the names are going to be easier to pronounce. Okay. So I wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. I also encourage everyone to go out and vote. Okay? Because there's early voting, right? You can vote anytime, starting next week. Yeah. Oh, the week after the 24th, okay, the 24th, up until March 3rd. So have a safe trip home. Thank you so much for coming.